It's loud. What's up, fam? Stand up, fam. Hope everybody's doing well today. Um, Welcome to Teacher Talk. So I think it's the second one for you guys. This is typically going to be the pattern, so I want to give you guys enough time to comment so that I have stuff to react to. So I'll probably post these videos on Mondays. Did I do one? Mondays and Thursdays. So that, yeah, so that you have ample time to look at it, process it, talk about it before you go to the next one. Um, so the Tuesday posts will be the following Monday, and then the Thursday posts, comment, my reaction will be the following Thursday. So you got time. Anyway, enough of that. A lot to get to with Cosby, so I don't want to waste any more time at the top. Um, Thank you to those of you who, in your comments, answered the question of, "Am I an asshole?" I think they were all, everybody said no who responded to that question directly. And I appreciate it, and I wouldn't hold it against you if you thought I was. But, and I said this in class um, on Thursday. Um, I just think it's important that you feel like you can express dissent about it or your feelings about it. You have the opportunity to um, to react and respond however you feel. I didn't want anyone to feel like they can't say this is wrong or I don't agree with it or whatever. So I appreciate everybody being, but I also think everybody being mature and sort of starting to deal with this situation, especially in cancel culture and all how that all works and how people are condemned. People like me are being condemned because just because I showed it and then I get lumped in. Oh, you condone Cosby. No. I mean, never, not even close. Um, so I do appreciate everybody. I also think, and I said this in class too, it's just as bad to um, to discount his art for his actions is just as bad as discounting his actions for his fame, right? Oh, well, he's famous, so he will let it slide. And, you know, that's a sentiment in this country that we struggle with. Um, oh, he's famous? Oh, well, then different rules apply. Um, those are just, I think it's just as bad for us to say his art, erase his career because he's a shitty person, is the same as saying erase he's not a shitty person because he's famous, right? Like, oh, just look the other way. That's an important way to process everything, I think. Um, and, you know, there's the two Cosbys, I wrote this down. The two Cosbys, right? My Bill Cosby was America's dad. Like, I'm not, you look it up. Like, I'm not even kidding. Was a real thing. Like, that was his impact on this culture, white and black. And so, not just black America, America, America's dad. And for you guys, like you have, I mean, a very loose connection to that Cosby. You know him as old, cringy, rapey guy. Um, and that's unfortunate. But I can see how that would sort of influence your viewing of this special and talking about his comedy and things like that. And in fact, Adelia came asked me after class on Thursday, like, was it harder for me to do, separate the art from the artist and process all of this? Because for me, the fall was so far, right? Cosby meant a lot to me and my generation and the country. Like, he was on this pedestal to some extent. To hear all these horrible things that he did that, was that more difficult to process than anything else? Because he had this squeaky clean image. I mean, he was Mr. Family Values and education and all these kinds of things. And then, you find out that you know, he's a scumbag. And you're like, was that difficult? It wasn't difficult for me. But I understand how it could be for people. Um, so, just a little bit more about that issue before we move into the actual stuff. Um, Separate the art from the artist. Uh, Basically, I just, you know, we had some good discussions. We had a really good discussion in class about this, and then I also teach the Cosby Show in my TV class. So it was yesterday. Similar discussion. It's like I feel like it's good to give students, you guys, the opportunity to at least even talk about it. And the example that often comes up is like you wouldn't teach a course in history and not talk about Hitler, like, right? You just wouldn't. Um, so I mean, this is it's not a great example, but it's uh, close enough, I guess. All right, so let's get into the meat, your comments and my responses to them. There's a lot. It's interesting. I can tell by just reading the comment which section you're in for the most part. um, and I mean that makes sense. Like the Thursday section has a little bit more perspective because we talked about it, and the Tuesday section, you guys are kind of on your own. You're just watching this and reacting to it. And it's just interesting to read them. And I appreciate both opinions. Um, so basically, my take on Cosby's stand up, and again, there's no equivalent. There's no equivalent to Cosby. We talk about Pryor having a lineage, right? Pryor, Murphy, Rock, Chappelle. You can trace that. He has this sort of lineage. There's only one Cosby, and I think that it often gets overlooked when you mention great black comedians. No one ever mentions Cosby, and it's not. And don't think it's because he's not good or he wasn't popular or successful. He's arguably more successful than all those guys put together, like his career in show business. Um, and what he did, Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, the Cosby Show, all his stand-up albums, his movies, like he was a mogul. Um, so what he did, what he did was he redefined blackness in this country for the entire country. And I I I can't I can't even relay to you what that means, right? he completely redefined blackness. Being black in America in the 70s and 80s meant very specific things to the culture, and not many of them were good, right? The stereotype of the African American was completely, you know, it was, well, I guess it was just racist, right? Poor, broken homes, uneducated, um, criminals. Like, this was Black America, the perception of it and the stereotype of it. So to see a guy like Bill Cosby on stage, on television, in movies, portraying blackness completely contrary to the the public perception, he didn't need to say this is about race. It was about race. So we talked about this in my TV class. I don't want to overlap too much back and forth, but his TV show, the pilot episode, literally pulls bits from himself, the special that you guys watched. The entire series is based on that. It's based on his life. It's based on that special himself. Um, and this, oh shit, I forgot what I was going to say about it. Um, Basically, the criticism of Cosby for a long time was he wasn't black enough. What does that mean? Like, he wasn't black enough, said the racist white critics and shitheads, right? Not black enough. Well, what does that mean? Well, he he dresses normal. He dresses like a white guy, talks like a white guy, right? Racist. Right? I mean, you can't navigate that statement without being like super racist. You just can't do it. But that was a prevailing criticism of Cosby with his TV show. You can't just make a black family white by, you know, having the husband be a doctor, the wife be a lawyer, and their kids, one kid's at Princeton, and they live in this big brownstone, and it's, you can't do that. Which is just low key saying success is a white attribute. So, I mean, it's just, yeah, you get mired in that kind of stuff. So, Cosby set out to redefine blackness. Like, not, I, I don't think initially he meant to say that prior Murphy, that type of blackness is wrong. But he's saying there are other ways, and his show and his comedy were were specifically written and performed to broaden the representation of people of color in the media, in entertainment, period. And I know we don't, like, you think about representation, we don't think about it, especially white people don't think about it because all you've seen your whole life is white. But to be a marginalized group or person of color or a woman, like, you want to see yourself, you want to see your people. And when you're only inundated with images of, you know, black criminals, I mean, that gets easy to think that's your life. That's what you're destined to be. So Cosby comes out of nowhere almost, especially with his TV show, which was watched by everybody. It's like, oh shit, that he's black too. He's like me. And look, he's got this nice house and this family and da, 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 da. Like, that's what I want. He was giving something, a positive representation, something to aspire to. And again, redefining blackness for a generation. Um, he was redefining what it meant to be black in America in the 80s. Let's just say, we'll just stick to that. And in a positive way. So, and I know a lot of you commented like, "Oh, he's not. He's just silly, and he's just trying to make people laugh." Like, then you didn't see it. You weren't looking for it either. You were sort of duped by the whole thing as well. Um, he doesn't have to come out and say specifically, we're going to talk about race and the racial divide in this country and the stereotypes are bullshit. And I'm here to tell you why they're wrong. He doesn't have to do that. Everything he says, he's doing it tacitly. So it's sneaky. It's really sneaky. And I mean, he publicly, I mean, obviously he was a piece of shit, privately, but publicly he never wavered from it. Never wavered. Like he firmly believed, like, I'm responsible, responsibility, opportunity. He's taking the responsibility in this case. I'm responsible for pulling this community up in some way. And I think he took that. I know he took that very seriously. Um, but how did he redefine blackness? He focused on family values, morals, education, all those kinds of things. So himself, the set that you watched, right? He's dressed in a nice suit. It's not red like Brian, like a tuxedo. It's not flamboyant. It's not leather like Martin Lawrence and Chris Rock and Eddie Murphy and all these comedians after him. Um, and he talks about education. His wife and himself, both college educated, and his commitment to that for his kids. Talks about his kids and his family, the intact nuclear family, which was a, a perception of a new perception of African Americans in the 80s. And that was one of the stereotypes, was that every um, black guy was a baby daddy, right? Right. Broken homes and, having kids and with multiple, like that. That was one of the stereotypes. Um, so he was giving this alternate um, definition of what it means to be black in America. And like, I can't, like, there's arguably more at stake for what he was doing than any other comedian ever. If you once you start to pick it apart, um, so a lot of your comments, and I noted them, like Amon's was one, like his comedy felt less significant. Yeah, I get that. If you can't, if you can't put him, if you can't see it through this lens, I get it. You know, the voices and the he's very physical, very clownish, I guess. Um, but as soon as you start to think about it, it's like, okay, this is implicit. It's not explicit, like what he's doing and what he's talking about. Um, and I wrote this down to sort of address all of the comments that kind of had a similar tone. Um, that his comedy feels less significant, or that there's nothing at stake, or that he was just being silly, or that he avoided hard to swallow topics, or that he avoided darker issues, or that it was not designed to promote change, or that there was a lack of socio-political message in his comedy. My question to you is, are racism and bigotry not dark enough issues? Is there not enough at stake with racism and cultural misrepresentations? Is there not, is it being silly to take those, take on those issues um, indirectly? Uh, is racism an easy to swallow topic? I, I think you all know the answer to that. Of course not. Um, just it's the fact that he's not being overtly um, aggressive or explicitly mentioning race. He almost never does in his career. The Cosby Show itself operated that way, and one of the big criticisms of that was racist at its core. Was he's not addressing the concerns of the African American community. That was the prevailingly white criticism of the show, and his comedy became it, that's how it got turned, right? Since he's not coming out and ranting and raving and screaming at the top of his lungs about racism and misrepresentation and all these kinds of things, then he's doing a disservice to his community. And I can't think of a more racist statement than that, right? Wouldn't Isn't this one of the concerns of the African American community in the 80s, especially? Um, isn't it concerning that most African Americans at the time didn't really um, had had basically been convinced to settle for less than that of which they were capable? Is that not something that you should address? Is that not an issue for not just the black communities, any communities of color, any marginalized group, to be convinced by the media and the representations of their people in the media that the best thing I can be is a criminal, or you know a janitor or something like that. His show and his comedy addressed that directly. You can go to college, you can have a wife and a family and be a, a doctor or a lawyer or an entertainer. Like, you can do these things through education and family values and all this, right? He gave this other template, this other path to, I mean, to blackness, I guess. And it was transformative. It was revolutionary at the time, and I think still is today. So that's my question to everybody who commented that, that it wasn't. I get it if it's not your thing. That's fine. I don't really care either way if you think it's funny, but to say that there's nothing at stake and it's not, you know, he avoids the issues and things like that. Like, is racism not an issue big enough for you? Or um, that was a question that I kept going back to. So think about it that way too. Um, Now Drew mentioned it was also, I don't know why I wrote this. Oh, right. Drew was talking about the stereotypes. Let me see if I have this here. Drew. Hmm. Relying on classic jokes. Yeah, playing the same kind of humor. Extreme disconnect between average family life. I don't know what I'm talking about. Um, yeah. Anyway, to Drew's comment, maybe you can make sense of it. I can't. Um, it was also a stereotype that black families had no values, that all fathers were just baby daddies. Like that was a stereotype that he was clearly sort of opposing with his act. Um, and mentioned that it didn't resonate with you because of the disconnect between how family dynamics have changed. About beating the kids and all his misogyny a little bit and stuff with his wife. But as much as there's a disconnect between your Drew, ours and Cosby's era of domestic life, there's a large gap in how we understand racial struggle as well. So you can't even you can't put into perspective the kind of things that he was dealing with because we're so far removed and there's still racial issues in the country. It's never going to go away, obviously, but um, he was he was ahead of his time in terms of trying to um, you know trying to bridge the gap between those disconnects. um, so it was a different world to him as a black man. You see what I'm saying? As much as it's a different world to you as a, member of a family in 2021, it was a different world for him as a black guy, and the black experience was totally different. Um, I think the same with misogyny. Allison mentioned the misogyny. I mean, that's how it was. We weren't quite there in terms of women being seen as equals, but his TV show would go on to represent Claire, his wife, in the show. As a lawyer, he's a doctor. They are very much equals. So, but there's still this sort of clinging to traditional conceptions of masculinity and stuff like that that doesn't ring true to this today. I mean, yeah, it's hard to avoid those things as well. Um, he talks about race without ever bringing it up. I kind of touched on that a couple times before. He never is just outright saying this is about race, and he shouldn't. Why should he have to? Right? Like everything he says, he's a black guy. That's apparent. Everything he says is a opinion about race. It's a stance in some way, and he chooses to take this stance. And I think it's an important one. Um, like to Sean's point, and this is not an exaggeration. He single-handedly changed the perception of African Americans in this country. Period. Like, who else can you say that about? Like, at a time when things really in the 70s into the 80s, things could have gone backwards after the civil rights movement, right? Easy to sort of settle back into, oh, yeah, sort of pseudo segregation and all this kind of stuff and prejudices. He came forth with his comedy, with the show, and all this kind of stuff, and single handedly changed the perception of African Americans in this country. Like the millions and millions of people that watched his show or enjoyed his comedy, like started to, you know, understand that blackness isn't this rigid and sort of diminutive set of stereotypes. Um, and that's huge. Ooh, it's 30 minutes. I'm going to put something in here. If you made it this far, I've been doing this in all my classes now with these videos because no one's fucking watching for some reason. I don't know. So if you've gotten this far, I'm going to give you a little Easter egg for extra credit, like bonuses toward your final grade down the road. Um, if you watch this far, comment on this post, this video, and use the word professor in the comment. But don't be obvious about it. It's like, mix it in like secret, like the word professor in a comment on this post, and I'll give you extra credit. And don't tell people. Don't say, oh, Vaughn put an Easter egg in the video. And they say, what is it? And they don't let other people in on it. Like, it's a secret to those of you who are care enough to watch these videos. So, word professor in the comment on this post. Okay, real quick, because I've been blabbering on. Jake. It's funny because I read your comments and I jot things down and I'm like, I don't even know what this means. Jake, I wrote, Black families are American families. See, we struggle with marriage too. Kids, ba ba da ba da. Like that's another fight that Cosby was engaged in. Was this understand the black family, like America is all of the races, all of the sexualities, all of the genders, all of the classes. Like that's what it's about. And I think for a long time, when you said the American family, you meant white people. And Cosby sort of tried to, or was trying to elevate, you know, elevate the black family to that level, to that standard, and just to be included in the discussion. Um, his act was largely centered around the American family dynamic. Yeah, he was making this case like, we're American families too. We're not any less than a white family. Um, but that goes back to, we struggle with, just like the white people, we have marital struggles, we struggle with kids, we struggle with our jobs and things like that. Like, you know, we're all in this together, as Troy and Gabriella would say. Um, we're black families, we're just like you, like that kind of thing. Um, and then Eric and Sonia brought up, made a connection between Cosby and Kevin Hart, and my heart broke. I'm like, come on. I get it on the superficial level, like that Cosby is silly and all these things, but hopefully by after, if you've watched this far, you see where I'm coming from and how that is kind of a blasphemous statement to make. Hart takes what Cosby did for people of color and moves it back 10 years. Um, that's my opinion. Like, I see it from a comedian perspective, but Hart is working on on the back of Cosby's, of the, on the back of what Cosby did for people of color and African Americans in this country. So to put them in the same category, um, I wouldn't do it. I'm not saying you guys are wrong. That's how you feel, but I hope that what I've said up until now might make you reassess that connection. And finally, Justin Lau left a great comment about anchoring bias and things like that and cancel culture, I guess, to bring it full circle since we started there. Really interesting take. Um, I've just been reading um, Operation Paperclip, which is all about, it's just fascinating, about the U.S. and Russia sort of fighting over German scientists post World War II and paying them to come here, and kind of how like shady that is. A lot of people don't know about it. Anyway, just that idea of anchoring bias and things like that, like how you explained it, and um, it's really relevant here. And I'll probably have to use that in the future when we're talking about Cosby and Louis C.K. and you know the litany of people who kind of you know the litany of people who find themselves caught between their public persona and their private shittiness. All right. Sorry if that video was all over the place, but a lot of stuff to talk about with Cosby. I hope I at least gave you some perspective. That's the goal with all this. So enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you guys next week.